Dorothy, one of the consistent themes in Bill Mulford's work was sorting the wheat from the chaff, making sure you recognised quality, not only amongst leaders, but in terms of the literature that leaders and others who are aspiring to be leaders would read to inform their practice. How can we be conscious about the differences between research that's poorly designed, poorly executed, and offers unreliable guidance, and more sturdy research that's based perhaps on a bigger sample or interviews that are representative of a particular area and in turn offer reliable member-checked data and recommendations? What can we do about that as instructors?
I think it's about getting people to look at what is rigour and validity in research. So be careful what you read. And often that's difficult because, and just let me give you a couple of examples. Currently in Australia there's been great debate about the use of national testing and the use of PISA to guide policy. And there's a couple of researchers that are doing some quite extensive study into the PISA collection, data collection analysis and whatever, which I think would really position people at high policymakers what could quite embarrass them in terms of devising national policy based on quite what Australia's called shonky data. And that's one area. The other areas we have national testing, and it's run by Australian Council of Educational Research, supposed to be the best researchers in Australia.
Yes.
And we've had big discussions about whether you can compare schools, which was the first thing, because all that data is published nationally under a website called My School Website, which anybody in the world can look up every single school and know what their data looks like. And that has created great debate. When we went to look at finding a way of demonstrating that schools had improved over a period of time, we decided that we should use what anybody that looks at school improvement always looks for, which is statistics. Show me the evidence that students have improved their achievement. And we decided we'd use NAPLAN because it was available. But using that and showing that you could actually show its reliability was a challenge. And we spent quite a bit of time going up dry gullies and whatever. And what we actually came across was a tool that the New South Wales government developed, which was called Smart Data. And what they did was track from the national data, track in New South Wales students, track each individual student over a period of time. So as reliable as national testing might be, you can track student growth over a period of time, and we used that data to select schools. But one of the problems we had, which was the Sydney system actually outperforms the national system. It's one of the highest performing systems. So you couldn't say, well, schools that were engaged in a process of whole school change, as ideas, have improved, because unless they actually improve greater than the system. So so back to the drawing board, and we actually come up with a measure that we could use that we could actually justify that, and then selected those schools that had achieved higher than the system and the national benchmarks, and over a period of time for individual students, and then went and looked at how they actually went about achieving it, how they actually not only just improved but over a period of time. And one of the issues is that that often data, like you can get short-term change, but whether it's sustainable is another factor. And people often claim things and then, they go back, or never go back, but if they did, it might not be the same. And so it is very complex and difficult to use broad-scale testing to justify things over a sustainable period.
Yes, indeed.
So schools then say, okay, well, how can I then collect evidence to show that that there has been sustainable improvement, and then you must look at school-based data.
Yes, and what would those school-based data look like?
Their own testing.
Yes.
A lot of schools now have individual education plans for students, so they actually track students themselves, and there's a lot of computer software that will do that.
Yes.
So it's more about teacher testing and teacher assessment within collaborative dialogue about a student's progress over a period.
Yes, and could that be complemented by demographic data about the school community, about the changes amongst teachers, those coming in, those going out, the teaching profile, the nature of the policies that have been instituted and created indeed at the school level? Would that be part of the story?
Absolutely, and I think that whilst people have criticised national testing,
yes,
it actually has enhanced the way teachers use data to inform teaching.
Well, that's excellent.
And I've seen a significant movement in the way in which teachers use data to actually inform, their planning for their classes and for individual students. And because I think that, Lorna Earle would be very pleased about that.
Yes.
And Judy Smead also in Australia
Yes.
has used a lot of her work.
Yeah.
And I think that people have become more conscious about that. And I think it does actually. There's greater possibilities of resolving learning issues earlier for students. And, a lot of people would say if a student isn't getting success early in primary, they often will be tracked into secondary as those people that are non-learners and non-participants. So I think that there has been some good spin-offs.
Yes, indeed.
But I think, the most distressing part is, making judgments about schools and comparing schools where they assume that one cohort is, one group of students in that school is the same as in another school just because it's the same size.
Yes.
It's or even the SES characteristics, because cultural groups often have different attitudes to schooling.
Yes.
So one particular cultural group will have great aspirations, but even if they're low SES,
Yes.
education is absolutely essential. And so it's easier to recover and sustain their learning than those that actually don't see education as being
Absolutely.
valuable.
And also some of the groups that are newly arrived to a country have different forms of poverty that they're exposed to in their early years in a country, and hopefully that ameliorates over time. But the nature of poverties amongst disparate school communities can be quite different. So turning to the challenge of doctoral students and master's students trying to locate themselves with quality literature is not only about the sample size, but it's about the nature of the design of the studies that elicited the data, how they were analysed, whether the conclusions actually genuinely responded to the questions from the study. So what do you find particularly compelling as an editor and also as a senior professor when you're looking at qualitative or quantitative data?
Well, I think one thing about qualitative research is it was never meant to be generalisable.
Yes.
And often you read studies and they've wonderful data from a small group of people that have shed light on a particular thing, a particular phenomenon. And then the conclusion is, well, this applies to every school in the world. You think, well, I think there's something wrong with this this leap of faith. And so I think you have to be careful about, you know, who the participants in the study were and how far you can generalise. So the limitations of the study actually need to be clearly articulated. The other areas I look for is there disclosure of position of the researcher, particularly in issues around the use of power or social issues that they're exploring.
Yes.
Because you can have a particular view about how you analyse data.
Yes.
Based on your worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And if that isn't explained by the person that's presenting the research, you think, I could read that data and I could write another set of conclusions.
Yes.
And so you should be clear about why you've come to those particular conclusions.
Yes.
And I think that, to me, I think a lot of qualitative researchers leave themselves open for criticism because disclosure of positioning and the viewpoint that you're going to take in terms of the data that you're collecting and analysing is not made, and it should be.
Yes, indeed. And that's an excellent point because, like you, I have seen some qualitative research that has been sloppy, and because it tends to be the form of research within education that has galvanised less respect than positivist or quantitative forms of research. It really is important for students, especially doctoral students, to make sure that their study is designed well and that it's conducted with a considerable amount of discipline. So if you're a student setting out, as many of our doctoral students will be, to undertake a study that warrants very close scrutiny by the examiners, what are some key things that they should keep in mind?
I think they have to be scholars. I think they have to understand the literature, and they have to understand the methods and approaches that they're using so that they can make a wise decision about, well, what's the best methodology and best approach in that I might use to answer the questions that I'm interested in. And are these questions rigorous enough that enable me to deal deeply with the topic that or the concepts that I'm working with?
Yes.
So very often you see that people are using methodology but they don't understand.
Yes.
And that's not good research.
It's risky.
And it's probably not going to get you a doctorate.
So sticking close to the quality literature on what usually makes a good thesis or a good piece of research is really important. And so when conversations are had on paper via the student who is preparing to announce their piece of research, and that's usually through the form of a thesis, how should they address the reader? Should it be in abstract, exclusive terms, or should it be more accessible? What's your thinking on that?
Should be accessible.
Language.
Language is so important.
Yeah.
And clarity of thinking. Often people hide their clarity or lack of clarity by using language that is incomprehensible. And you read it and you think, I've read this 3 times, I still don't know what that means. And often if you ask them what it means, they don't know either.
Yes. So
it's, clarity of thinking is very important, and talking about it. I always get them to talk as much as they possibly can to a variety of audiences about what they're doing.
Yes.
Because talking about your research and being clear about what you're doing, with critical friends that are friendly, really gives you confidence that what you're talking about is clear, it's comprehensible, and you can write it in a way that people can understand what you're doing.
Excellent advice. Okay, let's turn to Martin Seligman, who has authored Learned Helplessness, Learned Optimism for Children. We know from amongst the best leaders that they remain pretty much optimistic about the quality of their work and the quality of the work of those around them. In those moments where leaders question something, perhaps a crisis occurred, perhaps somebody that they'd had great faith in did something heinous, something that was not simply a mistake in good faith. What resources can they draw on to deal with those dark moments so that they can make sure they continue to work well as leaders in a school?
That's a challenge, and sometimes it's phone a friend. Networking is really important, I think. I think we underestimate the importance of people supporting each other at that level.
Yes.
And one of the things that we have done is develop supporting networks. So getting principals to share dark moments, to share things, and often it's just a friend at the end of the phone that just listens. And I think we underestimate the complexity and the difficulties of being a principal.
Yes.
And they're moments that they can't share with their most favoured teacher leaders. They can't do that.
Yep.
They need to share at a level of understanding with people that are in similar positions.
It's wonderful to hear you say that, because I have to say, despite the enormous talent and intellect in faculties of education, sometimes I have heard colleagues, not just here but in other universities, talking in ways that did not comprehend the complexity that principals often experience. And if they have had, for example, a pedophile on staff who has been exposed, thankfully, or somebody has stolen large amounts of money or done something clearly inappropriate and against the interests of schools and taxpayers and so on. Sometimes colleagues in faculties of education have not understood the level of involvement of intellect and ethical compass that's required of principals to get through those difficult circumstances. How can faculties of education help professors, help their colleagues understand that school principals and the work of schools is not a simple task and in fact warrants great intellect, but it's a different sort of intellectual prowess than we may have in universities?
Well, I'll answer in a roundabout way, because I have a belief that faculties of education have a responsibility to build very strong relationships with schools.
Yep.
We should be known by schools.
Yes.
We should be providing opportunities, whatever the opportunities that are required. We learn from schools and they learn from us, and that only then can we understand, when we have deep conversations with people, with practitioners, can we really get an essence of where they're at and where their issues lie. And we can do lots of enabling things, like our group have run principal learning circles. We have breakfast. They set the agenda for the next 6 weeks. We provide some input, activities, and they build this network, because we get them to share lots of things about themselves. One of the, I was talking about this earlier, one of the things we ask them to do is to go home and draw an image of themselves, their school, and their role in that school. So they've got to be part of that image, and to bring it back and then to share and talk about it. And some of the images they bring back, and they can then start to see some of the things that they do, they might not want to do, again, because it's a whole self-awareness
Yes.
of the role they're playing in a school and where they might be able to reduce their stress, to provide better networks of support within the school, and being able to say that amongst a group of people builds a real shared understanding that we don't have to be alone. We can lift the phone and talk to somebody, and that stays with that person. It's not going to be reported to district office that this person isn't coping. And that's the biggest fear, that I'll be told that I'm not coping, so I can't talk to anybody.
Yes.
And no one's an island. We should be providing support structures for people. And departments or faculties of education can help facilitate that process, and we can learn so much from them.
Yes, indeed. And one of the things that you said to me earlier today was the quality of research that can come from faculties of education, as opposed to perhaps private enterprises, may be such that it makes a contribution to revealing the complexity of school work, whether it's from leaders who are teachers or leaders who are principals. And one of the things that currently universities offer, which almost no other institution that's involved heavily with research offers, is a willingness to offer fearless research that's unblemished by having to offer particular sorts of results based on who is funding the research. So that independence is still with us, that capacity to truly report data as you see them. How do you think, as we go forward, faculties of education can continue to take up that role that they have, which is a precious role, but it's a role that sometimes systems don't necessarily like, because of course some of the results are at odds with system priorities or system values?
Well, it's the responsibility of universities, so I guess we have to find ways of doing that. A lot of doctoral work does that.
Yes, and that's another manifestation of what you were talking about when you were saying courageous leadership. That is an example where faculties of education have a choice to encourage truly honourable ethical research, or to be perhaps less creative, less courageous, and producing research that essentially is little different from what a private company might offer to a government.